Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Future of BizTech. I'm your host, JC Granger, and I have another fantastic guest on the show with us today. And listen, if you end up loving this episode, please show your love and appreciation by following this podcast wherever you're listening. And be sure to give it a 5-star review, preferably with some nice comments in there, because that is how techies like you and I find cool podcasts like this one. And today I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing the president of Linear Financial Technologies, Brian Geary. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what is it that you do?
JC, thanks for having me, and thrilled to be talking about Linear here with you and your audience today. So what do we do? We are a SaaS infrastructure company, really focused on the banking space, but there are some future kind of segments that we're going to talk about here. But we are providing the infrastructure to digitize and modernize their small business lending capabilities. So my background, I actually came from the banking space.
Okay.
So I started my career, actually I was in the military to begin with, but post business school landed at Citibank and kind of saw firsthand that the way that banks were helping to kind of serve the small business segment was still very kind of paper-based and very kind of friction-filled for both the small business customer and for the bank that was trying to process those. So I jumped over to one of the earlier kind of direct lending fintechs in the space, which was called On Capital. And then basically kind of this company was kind of born out of that, where we took a lot of the technology that we had built over the years as that direct lender and are using that to essentially kind of license that to our clients, again, to really kind of digitize that experience for that end small business customer.
That's really cool. Well, let me ask you a question. So for one, thank you for your service, of course. Were you doing something in the military that related to financial? I mean, a lot of people think all military is, shoot, bullet gun. And it's like 90% support. You know what I mean? So were you in a financial area of that, or is it completely unrelated? And if so, what made you want to go into finance and out of the military?
Yeah, no, great question. It was probably not super related to financial services, to be honest with you. So I was in the Navy on the surface warfare side. So I was on a ship, doing a couple of tours to the Persian Gulf. But actually, so one of my kind of last stints in the military, I was working in the Pentagon for essentially what was the head of kind of strategy for the Navy. So I was just exposed to some pretty interesting kind of thinking and a lot of the kind of just strategy that you learn in business school, kind of after that. But no, I mean, I think so coming out of business school, what I was really looking for was a bit of general management focus, but also just really drawn to the financial services industry. Obviously, a lot of innovation has happened there over the last 10 years or so. So it's been a cool time to be in the space.
Well, that's awesome. Now I took a preview at your website, and there was a screenshot on there that I really recognized, right? And it was this screenshot basically that it was two squares next to each other, and it was like options for someone to click on as far as like what they're applying for approval. So like a consumer, it seemed like a consumer or a business person was going to be, they could, ask like $50,000, like secured or unsecured. Like it was this really user-friendly interface. And so I've seen this before, like in SBA stuff. I've seen it in like credit line stuff. I've seen it when I click on some ad, when it's offering like credit cards or whatever. It's like real super easy interface. And the back end, I imagine, is what you guys are providing. So, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but are you guys essentially that back end that allows it to be so easy for a consumer or a business person to, apply for a loan or to get a credit line or, things like that? Are you guys behind that? Like, because as consumers, we get this all the time coming our way.
Yeah, exactly. That is us in a nutshell. We are behind the scenes. I would say our technology is white labeled. So it's always the client's kind of name and, kind of look and feel that you would see in that digital experience. In many cases, we're hosting that application that you're actually interfacing with. It still just has the bank or the client's name on it. And then once you actually kind of go through and submit that application, that's where really the magic of our SaaS platform kind of takes over. So we have integrated to a ton of data sources. And really what we're trying to do is automate as much as possible of that lending experience behind the scenes. And so if I could just paint the picture for a second, if you kind of go back in time 5 years ago, if you were a small business and wanted to apply, or maybe 10 years ago, if you wanted to apply for a small business loan, you had to go into the branch, they handed you a paper application, you took that home, you filled it out, and you came back to the branch with that, plus probably at least 5 different sets of documents: my tax returns, my financial statements, my resume,
Yeah.
and a number of other things, which that banker then took. They gave it to someone else who probably keyed the information in behind the scenes, and maybe a week or two later, you might receive a decision. So obviously, tons of friction in that process for kind of everyone involved. So that, again, like, that's where our platform comes in. So once an application comes in, we have all of these automated data sources that we go out and pool, and then really just trying to surface if a judgmental decision is required from someone within the bank, then we surface that quickly so they can either look at a document or make a judgment call so they can kind of quickly get you through to be approved. For smaller dollar loans, a lot of our clients are using us to automatically approve customers or decline. And then as you get up into, call it like above $250,000, loans and lines and more complex products, then there will be, a human kind of behind the scenes that has to kind of step in certain cases. But we're really trying to make it as easy as possible for them to help kind of make that decision, so you can get that answer back in like a day or two versus having it be, a week or two in the past.
So who's your perfect client? I mean, obviously I could tell you can work for, you can probably do this for any bank or any financial institution, but is it only banks? Is there a certain size? I mean, again, I'm sure you could take a look, but like if you had to, gun to your head, you have to pick one avatar of a client, like who is the best one? Who gets the most benefit out of hiring you initially?
Yeah, I think our primary customer segment today is super regional and regional banks. So I think they get a ton of benefit because they have a higher volume of small business customers that are coming to them for loans, and they have a number of products that they are helping to serve for them. So that's the number one. So I'll stop my answer there, but there are some other kind of segments that we're going into in the future as well.
All right, so tell me how you even became part. You're the president, so you're not the co-founder, or whatnot. So and we talked in the pre-interview that there was a way that you came to be part of Linear Financial. Let's hear that story. Where did you start off, and then how did you become the president of Linear?
Yeah. So this kind of ties into almost like the progression of what's happened in small business lending. So, for a long time, if you wanted a small business loan, you had to go to a bank. Call it, kind of 10, 12 years ago, there was this crop of fintechs that popped up that were direct to the small business in terms of lending. In some ways, they were almost trying to kind of displace the banks in this kind of small business lending space. So I joined one of those companies coming out of the banking world, which was called On Deck. And so they had a pretty good run over a number of years, and still, are going today in that kind of direct to lending model. And so I was an employee there, helping them to kind of grow their franchise. And then we really had this idea of, hey, we are building a lot of great technology. And there's a segment of the market that, as that kind of fintech lender, we're having a hard time serving, which is really that kind of very prime bankable customer. Because a lot of the fintechs, they had to get capital from other sources, and so it was expensive. And so the loans that they were making to the end kind of small business customers were more expensive than what a bank could make, therefore kind of serving that almost like second tier of kind of a risk down from what would typically be kind of bankable. And so we had this idea like, hey, let's take the technology that we have started to build, let's turn that really into a SaaS platform so we can have multiple clients on it. And then let's take that and license it, back to the banking world. We'll have a much broader reach in being able to serve small business customers, and kind of creating a very valuable company in the process. So that was, kind of our path. We actually formed a company called ODX, which was a spin out of On Deck. And then recently, about earlier this year, we merged that with a company that was called Foundation to create Linear Financial Technologies. So those two paths of coming together were actually very similar. Foundation actually started as a direct lender. They pivoted to this kind of lending technology model, where their clients were also in the banking space. And so we kind of merged together to become the leader in the space. So we have a number of clients, again, in this kind of super regional bank space, and are really the kind of the player in that space player to beat.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you a question here. What is it? So, if we have, someone who works for a regional bank listening, for example, right? And we get a lot of tech people on here, so we get some on the tech side. what is it like, walk us through what it's like to actually go on and to use this. Can someone go on and sign up and start playing around with it? Is it something where they have to get a demo first? Is it more enterprise style? Because it sounds like a pretty intricate thing, and then you set them up on your platform. So let's talk about the platform itself, and how does someone, a regional bank, even just start that process? How do they even get this to help them?
Yeah. Yeah, listen, I mean, from the high level, our platform it's very, kind of modern. So it's AWS hosted, it's modular, but it typically is, clients, obviously we have a business development team, but usually they're, in the market and having a conversation with us. It is probably, I would say, more on the enterprise, kind of sales side of your comment. We'll, come in, have a conversation, understand what their needs are, give them a demo. And then as they are interested in moving forward, we basically set them up on an implementation project. Those typically take, between kind of 3 to 6 months, let's say, to get someone live and leveraging the platform, mostly because there's integration points that we have to build between our platform and our client systems.
A lot of API calls, it's stuff like that.
Exactly. It's a lot of API calls, primarily for on the front end of the experience. Let's say you are an existing client, customer of a bank today. If we want to have like a single sign-on where you can use your credentials, we have all this data on you, we can import that into our platform. That's one typical integration point. And then the second is once you've actually gone through the process, you've closed that loan or checking account that you want to take out, we'll board that back into the bank's typical kind of like core or servicing platform, so they could take it from there and have it kind of live with the rest of their products that they're serving the customers with.
Very cool. All right, so magic question, of course, the future of biz tech. We got to talk about the future, right? So
Yeah,
first,
yeah.
I want to talk about the industry first. The banking, we've had multiple financial clients, right? Because I own a marketing agency. That's my thing. I'm a marketing guy by trade, but I'm also that tech nerd who was, hacking AOL when I was 12 in my dad's basement, that kind of thing. Like I have that story, right? I'm that kid.
Yeah.
So let's talk about where it's going. The audience is interested. I'm interested. So as your industry, you have competitors, of course, that do similar-ish things, right? Do you see any external factors in the market or legislation, because you're in a regulated industry, in that 5 to 10 year mark where you see things just hockey sticking in one direction or another?
Yeah, so if I go back to the comments I was making on the progression of the industry, I'll get to the future in a second. So if you went through, bank was the original, you had fintech lenders coming in. We as a technology company are helping those banks to compete with the fintechs, give them the same like great digital customer experience. I think the next wave of lending that we're seeing already happening today, and I think is going to accelerate in the future, is you have a lot of these software platforms that are out there today. I'll give you one example, Shopify, right? Like if you're an e-com seller and you need a place to like someone to kind of host your website, you go to Shopify. But Shopify is also giving you payments and helping you with inventory and a number of other things, almost like help you run your business. Mm-hmm. That's one example of this kind of vertical software industry that is out there, where they are also starting to add lending or other financial services products as part of their ecosystem. And so we're seeing a lot of that today, where these typical like very traditional kind of software platforms that have nothing to do with financial services, but they have a base of small business clients, data on those clients. They're really trying to embed financial services, especially kind of lending in our case, as an ancillary product or an add-on product to help kind of grow those customers that are on their platform and to make them kind of sticky with their ecosystem. So we are seeing that happen today. We are involved in a number of those relationships where we're helping those software platforms to embed a lending experience into their platform. And at the end of the day, like they may be funding the loan. We may bring some of our bank clients in to fund the loan. The funding part, we figure out kind of as a secondary. But what they're looking for is that digital experience and offering lending or financial services as part of their ecosystem. So I think you're going to see more and more of that happening, where you're seeing the kind of mind share shift of these small business customers. It's happening in consumer as well, but definitely in small business. It's kind of gravitating to these kind of software platforms and they're starting to embed lending within that as well,
Mhm.
which is just kind of just enhancing the overall kind of value prop that they have to customers.
What about at the more micro level? Because you mentioned Shopify, right? Does your, or even the industry, do you see the industry, whether it be your company or not, if I go and buy, something expensive on Shopify, now I don't know if this already exists because Shopify is a backend, you know what I mean? So if I
Yeah.
go on a website and I want to buy something expensive, I've started to see this trend now where all of a sudden I'm being offered payment plans, zero interest ones too. Just like, hey,
Yep.
6 payments, like Amazon has it built in already. I've already gotten, and sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't, depending on how much I'm buying. And I'm way too addicted to Amazon. I can't even talk about that right now. And like every other day is Christmas on my doorstep. It's ridiculous. Okay. So, but that being said, even they have these offers of like, payment plans. Does your system or does the industry in general, are you guys the ones responsible for these different websites that are now being able to offer these payment plans, in that, are you guys doing that at that micro level rather than just the really big bank level?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, what you're describing is kind of broadly known as buy now, pay later, which
Yeah.
is blowing up, in the
Yeah.
fintech industry. Obviously,
Yeah.
Affirm and other companies
It
are
seems like everybody wins, to be honest. Like, it's not a
yeah,
whole lot of
no,
money.
absolutely. I mean, it's in some ways it's replacing credit card spend. It's giving
Oh, God.
customers control over that purchase that they're making and when they pay it back. And it's if you're getting 0% interest, it's something that's kind of subsidized by the seller.
Mhm.
But agreed, it's a win-win proposition. So we are seeing buy now pay later come to the small business segment. So if the end customer is a small business, we're starting to see that trend start to kind of take root there as well. So I think over the next 5 years, that there's going to be massive growth in the buy now pay later small business segment.
Yeah.
Consumers already there and will continue to grow. Small business, it's just kind of starting to churn.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be a very, very big offering. And so yes, like that is a place where we are playing. Where, as I mentioned before, like we're helping the banks digitize their offering, but we're helping these software platforms with that almost like embedded finance or buy now pay later type of experience to be able to offer that as well. So that's an area that we're playing in for sure.
That's really cool. That I like. See, I like these real world applications to technologies that people maybe not understand right away, right? Like I like saying, okay, well, this is what you're doing over here, but like here's how we actually end up interacting with it, which I think is cool. Okay, so
Yeah.
now that's the industry. Let's talk about linear now. I want to know because my audience does like to have the inside scoop. I promised them that. Right, so you got to give me something here, okay?
Yeah, you got it.
And again, remember, there's a little bit of delay between when we record and when we drop. What's on your roadmap? What's coming out soon, additional to what you're doing now that you're really excited about from a technology standpoint or just service and general?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll give you one scoop here that we have not really kind of talked about too publicly.
Yes.
So
All right.
Okay, so we've talked about lending and account opening, which is the kind of core of our business. We also have a terrific analytics team on our side, and so what we've been working over the past kind of couple years on is fraud, especially in the small business space, is not being solved all that well. So there are data
What
providers
kind
out
of fraud?
there.
Let's be specific. There's so many types of fraud. So are you talking about like someone stealing someone's credit card, or are you talking about contract breaches? Like what kind of fraud are you specifically talking about?
The fraud that I'm talking about is it's kind of impersonating another small business, basically to kind of so
Like
what
a
we see a
corporate
lot of in
identity
our
theft.
industry is you're faking some credentials to apply for a loan.
Oh,
$100,000 comes into your bank account and then poof, you're gone. You never make a payment, and so
oh, wow.
you're basically faking credentials. And there's lots of ways to do that. So we
We
don't have
won't
to go
teach, we
into
won't
that.
teach anyone. We won't teach anyone on the show how to do it, but
Yeah,
it's
we don't have to go into
happening. It's
all the ways that you can do that. But that is a very big problem in the both consumer and small business lending space, where you're using fraudulent techniques to gain access to capital, taking the money and disappearing.
Wow. Okay.
And so that's what we have actually developed. It's really an AI-based model that is looking for anomalies in the data so that we can better predict when a customer is coming in if they're actually fraudulent. And and it's just at a very, very high level, like how to think about that. If you're a small business, you probably have some footprint that we could kind of determine that you exist. You probably have a credit score. You have a LinkedIn page. Your business may have a website. You've had reviews, things like that. And so what we're doing is going out and pulling all this data and bringing it back in. And it's very obvious if, they don't have a website or LinkedIn or any reviews. There's some funky data that we're seeing in the credit report, et cetera, that kind of you pull all that together and then you determine like, hey, we should look into this further to determine if it's actually fraud. So that we're calling that linear defense, and we haven't launched it kind of formally yet, but that's something that we're working on.
I got to tell you, Brian, listen, I love what Linear is doing, but that right there is probably, in my opinion, single-handedly the coolest thing I've heard from the finance industry in a very, very long time. Because you got my tail wagging when you said AI. And so I think it's fantastic because you're basically, and people think, a lot of people get in this mindset that, that if a bank gets hit, it's a victimless crime, right? Because it's insured and screw them, right? Like, bank robbers come in, don't worry about it. It's insured. And that's all fine. But what people don't understand about that equation farther down the line is that, okay, fine. Yes, it's insured, but these things happen enough. Insurance rates have to go up. And the businesses can only take so much of that before they have to start passing it to consumers. So it's really not, you are actually end up being the victim, whether you like it or not, right? Because these costs are going to come wrapping all around and come right back to you eventually, or they're going to come in the form of bigger restrictions because they got, screwed, so to speak. So now all of a sudden you're having to jump through more hoops as a business owner, and you might not get the funding you need when you need it. So there's a lot of victims in this. And I love that you guys have figured out how to integrate an AI, especially with the way you're doing it. You're going into real world applications of where business exists, not just in a document. I could go and I could probably sign up on the Secretary of State for Colorado with minimal information. And then most banks, if it's under a certain amount, it's like under 50 grand, there's no credit checks. It's very minimal paperwork, right? And so I can see what you're talking about. I never considered that people make a living, abusing this system and fraudulent. And I'm sure they don't get away with it forever. There's a lot of paper trail with what they're doing. So, but I think it's really cool. It sounds like your software takes a more holistic look at this applicant and can create red flags for the financial institution if something's not adding up. You're like, okay, but if you're really in business, wouldn't you have this, this, and this? And then they can check into that. And then, the less people who are doing that, it actually saves all of us money, the banks, insurance companies, which no one really cares about. But eventually, ergo, it saves me and you money in our fees that we're paying banks, and also in the time in the process, and maybe even things that we need. Because what's interesting too, here's something else I see, and tell me if you agree or disagree. I want to know. If your product really takes off the way I think that absolutely could here, then it sounds like it could actually decrease, because if you're supplementing security with AI that can look at things and reduce risk, then sometimes they can ask for less formalized things from you to apply for things because they have these other factors that they know are rock solid. I've already noticed in the last 3 or 4 years, the applications that I've done have become a lot less work for me. They just don't need as much. And I never, I wonder why, but I imagine they have other things that they're cross-referencing. And it sounds like yours could really take the market in a direction where it could make applying for a loan, not only for businesses, but even personal, a lot more streamlined, just because, hey, if you're on the grid, we're going to take a look at that also, right? If we see that you're actually real, then we don't necessarily need this, and this. We're like, okay, it's cool. I mean, am I right?
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, that's exactly what we do. I mean, we're doing that today for a normal application where we're asking for less documents upfront from the customer because we can go and pull all of those things from third-party sources. Absolutely.
I love that.
And then I think that the next evolution of that is what we were just talking about, where you actually incorporate an AI model, especially for fraud, where that really kind of gives you this confidence index score of do I think this customer is fraudulent or not? Yeah. So that you can, there's lots of applications for that.
Well, I've been in business 11 years, and it's like, with that kind of history of good history of being in business, I feel like I should have to prove less things, not that I want someone who's a startup to have to go crazy enough to find a million things. But what I'm saying is I think with time and experience and being on the grid, so to speak, that long and having a track record, I think you've earned and deserve the path to get easier as you go, and not just stay just as hard every single day, no matter how good you've been doing, and showing that you're a valid, responsible business owner. So I think that's really cool that technology is going. I love it. So I'm going to ask you one more question here. You are one of my guests you've been through a lot of different aspects of business, right? So, you've worked in corporate, you went through a merger and everything. So I'm going to ask you a question for the audience here. What was either the best piece of advice you've ever been given in business, or the best piece of advice that you could possibly give the audience based on everything you've been through? What would that be?
Oh, that's a tough question.
We're on the hot seat now. See, I didn't give you that one in advance.
I appreciate it. Yeah, something that I actually heard like early in my career, which has stuck with me for whatever reason, is that feedback is a gift. And so I use that a lot. Like, and I'll say that to folks on my team. If you think about like sports teams or things like that, like they're always being coached. They're always being kind of, like given kind of feedback and critiquing, and you get better with that over time. If you're kind of in business, sometimes you're just kind of on your own, like figuring things out. Yeah. And so I really do like to, give feedback, but always constructive in the fact that we can always be kind of getting, doing better or getting better over time. So
I like that. And, some of the advice I give to our, tech clients, especially SaaS, is I say, use surveys a lot if you can. Use questions that pop up, any customers you have a little chat box in their dashboard that just pops as, hey, how are you liking this one particular feature, right? And because you're in this bubble. When you make something, you're in this bubble, right? And having that outside perspective, especially with people who've used it, is a big deal. But I also encourage having outside perspective from people who have never used it, because there's two sets of fresh eyes. People only think it's one, and people think, oh, what do our customers think? So yeah, but they're like one step into that bubble too now, yeah. Right? They're halfway in that bubble. And what I find is asking people who have never heard of it, just saying, listen, here's my website. You open the website and they have to read it for like 10 seconds, and you slam it shut and say, okay, what do we do? Right? And if they can't tell you, then your message isn't simple enough, right? And so I think that's really great advice that you're giving, because feedback is huge. It helps you see what you're not seeing, right? It makes the blind see again. So, okay, so let me ask you this here. How can people reach you or the company itself? So the company first, like website, all that good stuff. If a regional bank or anyone in the financial industry or looking to start one is listening right now, where would they go to kind of check out this technology that they might be able to use?
Yeah, so the website is linearft.com. And, if you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn as well, Brian Geary.
And with Brian with an I, right?
With an I, yep.
Okay, just making sure, right? Awesome. Okay, well, listen, for everyone listening out there, again, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Give it a 5-star rating, throw in some cool comments, especially about Brian here, so other techies like us can find it and enjoy learning about all these amazing and helpful B2B softwares in the market today. Brian Geary, thank you so much for being on the show today. I think it's awesome what you're doing, and I am so excited to see what happens with the Linear Defense program. It's defense, right? Is that Linear Defense?
Yeah, defense. That's exactly.
Oh man, I love the name too. Of course, it's Linear Defense. Coming from a military guy, a Navy guy. I come from an Air Force family, and I did a little reserve action here. So I see what you did there. I see what you did there. Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Have a good one, sir.
All right. Thanks, JC. Thanks.